Hey guys, today we're going to talk about plant reproduction. This is the last part of plants. After this section, we may have a test on the whole thing. We'll probably have a test on the whole thing of plants. You just took a quiz on the first two parts, so it should be pretty simple to add this third part in. So there's not a lot to do. We might do this in 2 days probably. And then, yeah, then we'll do a review sheet, a castle learning, perhaps, and then the test. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways that plants can reproduce, and that's what we're going to talk about in this section. Okay, there's different types of asexual reproduction. Vegetative propagation is one way that plants reproduce without starting from seeds or spores. So for example, you can have a bulb, which is a short stem with a thick leaf, like onions and tulips use bulbs in the ground. Tubers are swollen underground stems. So for example, that's how potatoes can reproduce. And then stolons are runners or stem-like structures growing above the soil from the parent. So that's like what this is right here on a strawberry plant. They look all kind of connected. And this is just another picture of lots of different ways plants can propagate. Okay, sporulation is a type of asexual reproduction also. A new organism grows from a single spore that's produced by one parent. So one spore will grow into a new organism with identical DNA because it's asexual reproduction. So this was like the underside of a fern. You can see the little spores under here. And then the sporulation in mosses looks like this. So if you take a close-up of the moss, like moss in next to trees or in damp areas, you'll see when it's reproducing, it grows these. It has these little sprout-like things coming out. Okay, so you can have an alteration of generations in seedless plants. So one generation you can have gametophyte plants that produce the male and female gametes, and sporophyte plants that form the union of male and female plants to form a zygote. These generations can exist on two distinct plants, and ferns reproduce that way. So gametophyte generation in seed plants have the gametes are hidden within the sporophyte plant. So gymnosperms are cones, basically, and that's where their gametes are. The gametophyte is in the cone. In the angiosperm, the gametophyte is in the flower. So gymnosperm cones, the pollen cones are the male cones. They produce the tiny pollen grains, and pollen is the male gamete. Seed cones are female cones. They're larger than the pollen cones. The egg cell is the female gamete. So in the picture, which is the male cone? So the male cone is the pollen cone. So it's this one. And the female cone is the larger cone. So this is how they pollinate. The male cone releases pollen. The wind carries the pollen to the female cone. The pollen sticks to the female cone. And then if the pollen lands near an ovule, the pollen grain will split open. You get a pollen tube right here. So like that's pollen. If it lands next to an ovule, it splits open, you get a pollen tube. And the sperm travels through the pollen tube to the egg. The sperm fertilizes the egg to form a zygote, and then the zygote becomes a seed. Okay, so this is just another recap. So the male cone has the pollen. It travels to the female cone. If it lands near an ovule, that it can become fertilized. It produces the seed. The seed comes out of the cone, and then you get the young sporophyte, and then it grows from there. Okay. Structure of flowers. So flowers are the reproductive organ of an angiosperm. They vary in color, size, and shape. They usually contain male and female parts on the same flower, but they can be on separate flowers. Okay, so take a minute and label your diagram, and then we'll talk about the parts. So you have the stigma, the style, ovules in the middle, like at the bottom, it's like the harder part, peduncle, sepal, filament, petal, and then anther. Okay, so the sepals and the petals, the sepals are the outermost circle of flower parts. They're often green and they look like leaves. Petals are the brightly colored parts of the plant. They attract pollinators to the plant. And those are your petals. Okay, so the stamen and carpels. The stamen is the male part. The anther produces pollen grains. Filament supports the anther right here, with the anther and the filament. Carpels are the female parts, which are the innermost section. The ovary is the broad base. It contains the ovule. The style is the narrow stalk. And then the stigma is the sticky landing at the top. Okay, so that's another picture. And then try to use your notes and label the different things over here. Okay, so what do we have? We have the stigma. You have the style. This is the ovary, and this is the ovule. Those are the female parts. And then you have the anther. H is the filament, I is the sepal, and J is the petal. So the carpel is the female part, letter E, and the stamen is the male part, letter G. Okay. So let's see what time we're at. Okay, we'll just do one more. Actually, why don't we stop there and then we'll just do angiosperm pollination and fertilization on Friday, and then you'll have a review sheet over the weekend. Okie dokie.